And then soon you will just see the four panelists. The format of today's meeting, I'll just give you a couple of brief comments to open it up, and then I'll turn the meeting over to Jason. But I thought we'd start off with the panel, and they will run probably for 30 to 40 minutes or an hour, whatever works best for them. And we'll have a half an hour at the end just for open questions from anyone from the audience, or we'll see how the time runs. Maybe we'll break into a couple of small discussion groups and give everybody a chance to share. But as you know, with the Community Hubs initiative, we've studied a number of different parts of the community, and we've had panels on different topics over the past few years. Earlier this year, the United Way announced Planet Youth, and it's an initiative of just really supporting youth in our community and help them to succeed. I know in my other volunteer roles, formerly with the Calgary Police Commission and the YMCA, I've seen how important it is to support youth in the community, and what an important job those organizations do. And for some of you with Rotary, you may not know, Rotary started a little club called the Rotary Boys Club about 100 years ago, or almost 100 years ago, and that's morphed into what is now Trellis. So we've had our hands on quite a few parts of the community here. But what I would like to do at this point then is introduce Jason Lidberg, Director of Planet Youth. Jason has been working in youth engagement and community development sector for the past 15 years, working with the Indigenous community, youth, and newcomers to Calgary. He spent the majority of his career with YMCA Calgary, which is where I had the privilege of first meeting Jason, and he's excited to be leading the implementation of Planet Youth as part of the United Way Calgary and area Planet Youth Initiative. So Jason, I'll turn it over to you to try and give you and the panel as much time as possible. And I'll see if I can sign myself off here.
Sounds good, Howie. Thanks so much for organizing this and giving us the opportunity to share a little bit more about Planet Youth. So I am going to just share my screen here. I will, hopefully it works right away for me. I haven't used Zoom for screen sharing for a while, but here we go. Just give me a second here. Apologize, the Zoom dashboard is covering where I can start my slides. There we are. And I'm sorry, I started at the very end. All right, sorry, my bad. Hopefully everybody can see that. So yeah, thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to speak a little bit more about Planet Youth and the initiative that we're going to be starting as we bring it to Calgary. So just to begin, what is Planet Youth? So basically, it's an evidence-based primary prevention approach. So it's not really a program or in the traditional sense. It's more of an approach about how we think about communities and how we think about building communities that are supportive for youth. It was developed in Iceland, and the main reasoning that Iceland brought it about was to address their rates of drug and alcohol use amongst youth. However, we're expanding it to think holistically, not just about drug and alcohol use, but about youth wellness, mental wellness, and that how we think about our communities. Again, as I say, to support positive youth development. So again, in Iceland, they call this their hero slide. And so this really demonstrates the success of the project. They started in 1998, approximately, is when they started really tracking these numbers. And it shows basically a dramatic decrease in cannabis, drinking, and smoking over the last 20 years. It's being adopted in 14 countries globally, and really at like very significant scales when we look at other countries. So the entire country of Chile is implementing the process. They're very early on in their stages. A number of states in Mexico are implementing Planet Youth. In fact, one of the states, Guanajuato, I believe it's pronounced, they've got, I believe, 10,000 plus people working on this in volunteer and staff capacities. So it's really being, the success of it is really being demonstrated. Calgary is the first to implement here in Western Canada. And one of the things that Calgary is doing really uniquely, which makes me really proud to be part of, is the Indigenous Parallel. And this is really groundbreaking work that we're seeing internationally, both within Planet Youth, but even in the broader substance use prevention community. We're talking about moving from just say no to drugs kind of mentality to a broader sort of preventative approach in terms of preventing youth from becoming involved with problematic substance use. An Indigenous Parallel is groundbreaking, and really need to see how Calgary is leading the way in this. So these are the core sort of principles of the approach about how we look about it, how we think about it. I think I don't want to get tons into detail about everything, but a couple of things that are really important to bring out about Planet Youth. It's really about community-led decision-making. So people who live in the community, they know what their community needs. The parents, the agencies that are providing support to youth, the schools that are seeing youth on a day-to-day basis, they know what's important. And so Planet Youth is really designed to provide real-time data to these groups of people about what their youth are experiencing, and then combined with the knowledge that they already have, how can groups of communities respond to what their youth are saying in their community and really build those foundations of community that support positive youth development. Again, the other thing to really highlight that it's a primary prevention model. So this isn't maybe slightly different than other programs that we've been involved with. It's not necessarily about running a after-school program 3 times a week, and then we're going to do pre and post tests to determine the effectiveness of it. We're going to think holistically about the entire community and the systems that affect youth development within that. So how are the schools responding to youth? Is there adequate transportation to recreation opportunities? Is there actually leisure and recreation, so art and sport and music that's available for young people to take part in? That's skill building. So if a young person takes a photography class, they want to be able to improve their photography skills and to be, making the best photographs that they can, as well as character building. So thinking about issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, thinking about social emotional learning. How are those being embedded into the program, and that we're developing the character of young people to be community leaders themselves, and to be engaged in their communities, to have meaningful relationships, and to also be a contributor to meaningful relationships in their communities. And then the last point that I'll just bring out here is it's really about bringing together researchers, practitioners, and community members together. And policymakers, sorry. So we want to bring families with research so that families know what their youth are saying, but as well as know what the best research is that says, like, hey, these are some things you could think about as you're speaking with your kids. We want to bring in community agencies that have significant relationships with children, and then the policymakers as well, because we know that sometimes the issue may be as complicated as there is a lack of access to programming space, but there could be, are there government levers that we could activate that would open up some spaces in our communities? Or is it about transportation? Or is it about the way, like this question arises for community agencies? So what are the policies that an agency may have that maybe supports youth development, or maybe is creating unintentional blockages for youth to develop and grow to their full potential? These are the areas of focus. When we talk about how we're going to be addressing things within Planet Youth and the systems that are involved, these are the big systems involved. So family or caregivers that are working with kids, the extracurricular activities or sports, schools and local communities, and peers. And so we really want to understand what are the risk and protective factors that a youth is going to experience. So notice the youth is in the center of this. So has to be in the center of all of our decision making about this, and how they interact with these different systems is really how we're going to be addressing the work going forward. And what we're going to do, how we're going to hear from the youth, is we're going to do a survey with the youth. So we're going to work with local schools to administer a survey. We're going to do it once every couple of years, this survey. The results are given back to the community within 6 weeks. And then this data is used by local communities to inform decision making. So on my screen is an example. This is a real life example from a Planet Youth in Ireland. And when they do their survey, this is what some of the things that they experience. So, I think that it's pretty small, but 91% of them are saying that they've got warm and caring relationships with their family, which is really important because that's a real protective factor for young people in terms of good decision making. But then we start getting into some of the more challenging questions about like how often they're involved in extracurricular activities. Are they spending significant time alone? How many of them are saying that their peers are getting drunk, for instance, on a regular basis, which really affects the decisions that a young person makes. And so these are all factors that really play into the decisions that they make. I happen to know that this Planet Youth in Ireland, one of the things that they really focused on was the amount of sleep that young people get. There's a real strong correlation in the data that they got back between the amount of sleep that a young person gets and a young person's mental health. So they've spent actually a lot of time and energy around parent education about how much sleep 12 to 17-year-olds should be receiving and how to improve the quality of that sleep. And how to have conversations with your kids about sleep and how to encourage good sleep habits even in yourself as an adult. So these are the kinds of things that Planet Youth hopes to activate, working with families in really unique ways, bringing families together to talk about, maybe issues and pressures that they're experiencing and how Planet Youth can be a support for families to create greater connections, all in service to their youth. Or the other big one that a lot of communities globally are doing is the implementation of a leisure card. So giving, the best way I can describe it is like a gift card for every youth. I think in Iceland, it's about $1,000 Canadian equivalent that they can use to access recreation opportunities. And in Iceland, they're, again, really describing that really broadly is what those recreation opportunities are. So sport, art, music, dance, really broadly. And being able to learn in Iceland about how youth are engaging in those activities, and really like a lot of the youth are thinking about themselves, about how they can develop themselves holistically. Today I want to do skiing and take ski lessons. Next session I want to do swimming. The session after that I want to do music and learn to play the guitar. So really like allowing youth to be guide themselves in the process. By giving them that card directly to each youth, obviously administered through their parents, it takes away a lot of barriers. So there isn't an application process that everybody has to go through, which can be a barrier for people who don't speak the predominant language, or questions of if they have precarious housing situation, that we don't have to worry so much about address, but we can follow follow a young person. In Iceland, they're just administered through the school. So whatever the school data has, they can follow through the schools. And so can really reduce barriers along that way. So here in Calgary, we've identified some pilot communities, Saddle Ridge, Shaughnessy, Thorncliffe, Huntington Hills, the Greater Forest Lawn community, really building off of a few initiatives that have happened in the city. So recreation is a big one. And so we know that there's some great recreation facilities in these communities. The next is the United Ways and City of Calgary's Hubs Initiative, which was really birthed through the Rotary as well. And so being able to build off of the work that's already happening there, building off the work that's happening in All In for Youth. A lot of the schools in these communities are All In for Youth schools that we can continue to build off the work and the learnings that we've taken from those initiatives in there. And then a number of our agencies. YMCA Calgary is very strongly present in some of these communities and has been for a number of years, even outside of their main facility. So I'm thinking like the Thorncliffe, Huntington Hills, and some of the All In for Youth and Indigenous work that we've done with Diefenbaker and Sir John A. Macdonald, for instance. Really really building off of that, but also working with the schools and saying that these have been communities that they would identify as being of interest to them as well. And then thinking about how they really represent, like, a lot of who Calgary is wrapped up in this. These are all very diverse communities, economically, demographics, but representing sort of inner city communities with great access to public transit, as well as suburban communities that don't have as many resources or as great access to transit as other communities. So I think, in a pilot phase, this really allows us to think about how we can build off of our successes. We're working, in terms of where we're at currently within Planet Youth. We're continuing to build this coalition of organizations that support youth. We're still in a fundraising phase, and hopefully wrapping that up towards the end of the second quarter this year. And really doing a lot of engagement and community work. United Way of Calgary and area has done a lot of asset mapping in these communities. And an exciting place now for us is that we're going to be turning over some of our leadership. Planet Youth, again, really built in a collaborative model and working with our partners, turning over leadership to some of the community level initiatives to YMCA, Trellis, and Muskanawa. To really provide the expertise that they have in community development work and the partnerships and relationships that they have to lead our initiatives at a community level. So our upcoming, obviously, hiring the project leads, which has taken place, and we've got our first onboarding session tomorrow. And we'll be, over the next couple of quarters, activating our local action teams in community. We'll have a public launch in the spring of 2023, and this year we hope to administer our first surveys. We're just working through the processes with both school boards to get those authorizations in place. So yeah, that's it. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. Hopefully that works. That's not the button. Great. So that's it. And I think maybe I'll just give a couple of minutes for any questions that maybe arose from my presentation, and then we'll move into the panel discussion. Great. And if there are no questions, I will just go in. I think what I will do for the panel is just ask everybody to quickly introduce yourselves, who you're with, and just a little bit about yourself. And I'm going to go in what the order looks like in my screen. Megan, that has me starting with you, if you're all right with that.
Good evening, everyone. Really nice to meet all of you. I am the Planet Youth lead here at Muskanawa, as well as the team lead at Diamond Willow Youth Lodge. I'm from, there's a little bit of a convoluted story of who I am. I'm from Peguis Reserve, Manitoba. I'm Anishinaabe, Treaty 1 territory. I'm also Icelandic. My Icelandic ancestors settled over in Treaty 1 as well, next to Gimli. And that is where my father and most of that side of my family is from. I'm Sami Finn. So my Sami Finn family settled in Treaty 6 territory. And for those of you that may not know of the Sami, they are the indigenous people of that area of Scandinavia. And I am also British and Welsh. Most of that family is now in BC. I always acknowledge and talk about this as we had an ancestor that hunted and killed Indigenous people in the States in the 1900s. I am currently married to a Blackfoot man from down south, which is wonderful. We have 3 kids. I've been doing this work since 1996. I actually started as a peer support worker, working with high-risk vulnerable populations, children being sexually exploited. I lived in a youth shelter for 2.5 years with the young people to now where I am today. So I'm super passionate about youth voice being first, as well as, seeing where Planet Youth can take us. Nice to meet you.
And I'll pass it over to Karen now, please.
Hello. My name is Karen Keprin. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a settler here on Turtle Island. I'm originally from Treaty 13 territory in Ontario and have called Mohkinstsis home for just over 12 years. I've worked in the nonprofit sector in various positions, from hospice work to homelessness to youth in care, to family-based work, as well as after-school programming and childcare, and community hubs and community development work. So I know there was some reference to the Sinalta Community Hub, which is one of the United Way and Rotary Partnership community hub initiatives. And I've worked in the 1000 Voices one, which is in the Saddle Ridge community, where I've had an opportunity to work with Jason historically, which is a funny full circle piece. I'm super passionate about looking at long-term prevention solutions and really holistic approaches to solving problems. I had an opportunity to attend a Planet Youth session years ago when the folks from Iceland came over to initially talk about it, and that sparked my interest. And so it's been really exciting to have it come back into my world in this way. And I'm really excited. So thank you, everyone.
Great. And now I'll pass it over to Tanis.
Great, thanks, Jason. And good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me and for having us out for the afternoon to talk a little about Planet Youth. I'm with YMCA Calgary, also she, her pronouns, and also would identify as a settler in this land as well. Grew up actually in Manitoba as well, although Megan, a little bit further south than what you would call home. And like Karen would say, call Mohkinstsis home now and have for close to 25 years. It seems hard to believe. And currently the COO with YMCA Calgary, but have a long history in working with children and youth in the organization, from childcare to after-school programs to youth programs, and a significant amount of time, I would say, in our philanthropically funded programs, which serve more vulnerable youth facing multiple barriers to success. So like Megan, like Karen, like Jason, very excited about Planet Youth and this opportunity where we can serve youth, keep youth at the center, and really look at holistic wellness, and also look at ways we all work together in service to youth and providing them the greatest opportunities that we can in service to the journey that they're on. So really happy to be part of the work, and really excited about moving into this real action phase and seeing what happens next.
Great. Well, thank you very much, everyone. And so I just have a few standard questions that we'll get this panel started with. And my first question is really about, and I think I'll start with Tanis, and we'll just go backwards. So we're giving a fair chance to everybody to be on the spot. What attracted your organizations to Planet Youth in the first place?
Yeah, I think it would be really attractive to us as an organization for a number of reasons, actually. It's really exciting to be working from a model that's been tried, tested, and true. So Jason talked about, the late 90s was when Iceland developed the model. And so they've had a number of years of testing the model. And we now have the benefit of learning from that. And we certainly are looking at a Made in Calgary solution, but based on a model that's very successful. We're excited about the Indigenous parallel that Calgary is adopting. We do have an Indigenous department within YMCA Calgary, and they offer educational programs, health and wellness, recreation programs, Indigenous culture at the center. So excited to see what we can learn from that and continue on that journey. And probably the other pieces that will be important for us is that strength-based prevention approach, and being able to have some real evidence that will inform the decisions that we make, that real-time data that's exciting for us and important to us as an organization. And finally, most important, I think, for us is that youth-centered approach and being able to demonstrate that youth truly are at the center and that their voice is important. And that I think we have opportunity to work with others in the community to ensure youth are seen as valued contributors in the community.
Karen?
Thanks, Tanis. I would echo everything that Tanis said. I'll try to add something different. I also forgot to mention I'm from Trellis, which was in 2020 a merger between the Boys and Girls Clubs of Calgary and area and Aspen Family, for those who aren't familiar. And yeah, I think what attracted Trellis to this project is really looking at the high level systemic prevention lens. I know I was at one session where they talked about one of the states in Mexico that had implemented it, and they were at a press conference and someone in the audience said, when will we start to see results from this initiative? And the answer was 20 years from now. And you could hear a pin drop in the audience. And I think that got me so jazzed is a lot of the time we try Band-Aid solutions, you know, what will help this person right now, but what will help the next generation, 7 generations from now? How do we want our community to look 7 generations from now when all of us are long gone? What are the ancestors that we want to be remembered as, and how do we set the stage for that? So I think although Trellis has a lot of investment in sort of what might be considered the deeper intervention in terms of having Calgary's only youth homeless shelter, and 7 group homes and a robust foster care program, how are we also doing ourselves out of a job so that 7 generations from now, Calgary doesn't need a youth homeless shelter, doesn't need a group home system, doesn't need any of those things. And to get there, we need to invest in high level prevention initiatives like Planet Youth. So that's what attracted our agency and myself in particular. Like Tanis, we're excited about looking at the Indigenous parallel, and I hope we use the term parallel really loosely as time.
I think Karen's frozen a little bit, and hopefully it's not me that's frozen instead. But maybe like I think to echo a little bit on Karen's point, just because we've been having this conversation about the parallel, and I hope that I'm not speaking on behalf of Karen too much, but I think what we're thinking about the parallel, it isn't so much that we're doing all the same things in all the same ways, but one through an Indigenous lens and one through a Western lens, but that we're intentional about giving space to both the Indigenous and non-Indigenous parts of the implementation to move at the speed and in the way that they need to move to best meet the community need and to be authentic to meeting that community need. Karen, come back, great.
Sorry.
Maybe Megan, I'll pass it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. I can definitely echo what everybody else was saying in relation to how Planet Youth framework works, that it is an upstream approach and lending the focus really on Indigenous voice, but adults and systems and policymakers being the ones that need to do the work to make that environment different for our young people. And in relation to Moscano, I can't speak for my colleagues Kirby and Jennifer, but I think for us, it's been consistent that we see inequities for our Indigenous youth. These things are different for our Indigenous youth, but it's very natural for us to seek their voice and to seek elders' guidance in terms of what we need to do to move forward for them, and then work on that in an action-based way with that accountability to the elders and to the youth. Yeah, and so I think this is the first time in my 20+ years of working in this field that I have seen a framework actually focusing on the environment versus what's wrong with the young person. And also I can speak from a personal place, being a peer support worker, that mentorship and leadership piece is also very important. Building that self-efficacy, the self-esteem in the young people, that they matter and people care about, where they end up in their lives. So I think Planet Youth is definitely something that it can happen over time and over that 20-year span, as Karen was talking about, because things and change takes time. And also looking at that policy piece in terms of whether that's agencies or schools or stuff like that. So I'm excited. We'll see what happens. The Indigenous parallel pieces has been really, really great, like Jason was mentioning. And I think the piece of us leading that work has been lended to the, I guess I will just call it the Western side, allowing us the autonomy to do things in the way that we know how to do things, seeking our community guidance and moving forward in a good way. So I appreciate that we will be able to continue to do things that way. So thank you.
Yeah, that sounds good. I think, so I'm just looking at I brought the chat up. And so Megan, I'm gonna stay with you for a second. So 2 questions for you. One is if you can give us a brief overview of Masconawa. I'm not sure that everybody is familiar with it. And then the second piece is how does primary prevention work fit into your organization and the work that you're already doing?
So Masconawa, I know, and I don't know all the details because Kirby actually created Masconawa. That was formerly known as Pathways. I think over 30 years ago, he was the first person to develop the first Indigenous group home in this city. And he worked really hard to develop Masconawa into what we are now. So we are very much a community value-based organization that really falls upon our Indigenous teachings. We are a Cree organization. So we also have Cree, Blackfoot, Dene, Métis, and Anishinaabe elders to support our urban and rural young people and families that come through here. And so Masconawa offers various programming. So they have a couple spaces for the Family Resource Network where they really focus on childhood development. We have Diamond Willow Youth Lodge, which is a youth hub, youth voice centered. So we really run off a youth committee that tells us kind of what they want to what they want us to be implementing in this space or in community, to rec, to culture, to ceremony, to life skills and whatever. So we adapt programming or relationships based off what those young people kind of tell us. And so we're always inviting and engaging new youth. Masconawa also has the Escopios program, which is a youth program. They support youth the same kind of, our age range is 12 to 29. I think they go up to 24 in the Escopios, and they're more of a land-based, cultural specific youth program. So they support youth and connecting youth and prevention through culture. And that's a lot of what we kind of talk about with our young people, seeking out identity and belonging and who they are, unlearning some of those things if we haven't been brought up in our own communities and very disconnected and what it means to be an Indigenous person in this world. And Masconawa also does like home visitation with families. So what else do? We do lots of things. We have elder hours, we have language classes. Like, I think we're pretty adaptable based off what our community kind of tells us what their needs are. And so we often talk about not telling, we don't call our families clients, they're our relatives. So that really changes the way we kind of, work with them, right? That we're all connected in one way. And in relation to primary prevention in Masconawa, whereas would be very much about that connection to identity, belonging, culture, building self-efficacy and equity, and being creative and flexible. I think because for our Indigenous young people, that looks different for them, as many of our young people will come from their communities into from urban back into their communities. Some of our young people aren't prioritized on secondary education because there's other things going on in their world that it's very cultural for us to choose our families over other things, and so have made decisions to have to not finish school to take care of their families. And so being safe spaces all over the place to support them in whatever that looks like, and helping them get to a place of achievement. And that's often something that we discuss. And actually, I'll coin my husband's term is we overcome our adversities and trauma through achievement. Because we're very, very accomplished people. We're a very adaptable people. So there's a broad range of us. And so I think that's something we talk a lot about is our self-determination to be better, right? And move forward in this community. And I think that's what Masconawa does, is to build that resiliency and that hope. And I really see Planet Youth doing that as well.
Thanks, Megan. Tanis, can you just provide us some insight into how you see a primary prevention model really fitting in with the work that YMCA Calgary does?
Sure, thanks, Jason. I think, we would say that we are a strength-based organization, and that's a bit of a cliche maybe, or a phrase where it's like, what does that really mean? And so I think at our foundation, we would say that we believe that everyone brings something. And everyone has skills and everyone has talents. And so what we want to do at the YMCA is build on that. And whatever assets you bring and you have and you possess, we want to create an environment, whether it's just the facility and how you feel, whether it's a program, an experience, that will build on the strengths that you have. And Planet Youth is very much about that, right? It's about constructive use of time, and it's about positive relationships amongst peers, amongst family, in the school environment, in the out of school environment. And so at the Y, we're very much in that out of school environment for youth, but we also serve families as well. Youth don't live in isolation, generally speaking, and they don't come to the Y in isolation all the time either. So I think for us, that prevention model and that constructive use of time and building on the strengths that people already have, that's really our philosophy and our foundation. And I think that's what makes Planet Youth exciting as well.
Great. Thanks so much, Tanis. And Karen, did you have anything to add from Chalice's perspective?
I think sort of similar to what I had mentioned before, it's been Trellis's lens to look at how are we reshaping our communities and doing ourselves out of that intervention work. So really investing in that within our communities. And I think we've done it in different ways through the hubs initiatives, through community development initiatives, and taking that approach of seeing the community as the expert or the person we're working with as the expert. And so it's really digging deeper into that and doubling down on it, I guess, which is really exciting. And in a contrast, also seeing how our existing landscape and our existing offerings can weave into the work. So in the past, I've done research, and it can be challenging sometimes as a researcher to go into a community or go into a family's home and ask questions about what's going on. And when you're looking at a long-term solution, you're not actually necessarily helping someone with what they might tell you is going on today. So we also hope that through our network, I think all three of us as agencies work together in different ways and then have our own internal capacities. But how can we also in the moment help some folks out? If we're holding a community action team and it comes out that basic needs are a concern, that we're also putting people in place that aren't just researchers. They also have the skills, information, and connections and networks to be able to solve those needs in the moment too. So I think this is also a really unique approach to research, because it's sort of research when you look at it, but it's more community development in terms of how it's going to play out, which is exciting. Yeah.
That's great. And Karen, just sticking with you, We've spoken a lot about community development and the Indigenous parallel and putting youth at the center. So how do you see that affecting your own organization? So how, and I think Megan really touched on this from, this is one of those systems and policies that we're talking about. So how does Planet Youth now change Chalice as an organization? How do you see that happening?
I think it's a really good reminder that in general, community development is more of an Indigenous approach than a Western approach, traditionally speaking. And so having that at the root and the focus of what we're doing is a really good reminder that this isn't the typical way of the Western approach. And so it's good that we're kind of getting off on that foot in terms of how we're tackling this. So I think, and as Tanis alluded, like all of our agencies, I think, take pieces of that into play in all of our different programs and interweave it. But it's exciting that these are the first and foremost principles of this model, and this is the way it's going to happen. And I hope that we even take some of these approaches and learnings and have it bleed into the rest of all of our approaches and works across our agencies.
And Megan, same question to you.
Can you repeat that, Jason?
Sure. So it's just that how do you see, if we've been speaking about community development, an Indigenous parallel, as well as putting youth at the center. So how is that not just changing the community in service of youth, but how is that changing Masconawa and the outlook that you're going to be taking in the future?
Well, I think it's also looking at, like, I think Karen and Tanis was talking about that it needs to be adaptable and flexible based off the need of the young people, whether that's long-term or short-term, looking at their overall wellness from their perspective and how do we partner as a community, and whether that's Indigenous community or even agency community or policymakers kind of surround our young people with what we say their needs are. And I think that's not linear. It's complicated. Providing safety for them is going to really need to come from them. And I think as adults listening to that, and I think we do that here, but it will also open up more opportunity for partnerships. And I think that's kind of what we've done a lot more recently is, I mean, they do it a lot already, but like I can only speak for myself within Diamond Willow and doing Planet Youth is the partnerships that we've been able to build already with, with the YMCA and with USAE and with Awatan and with the CPS Indigenous Relations Office. We always are talking about how do we work together to support our young people? How can we build our resources or share our resources to create opportunities for our young people? And so that's something that I agree with Karen that we kind of do naturally. I think it's just kind of figuring it out on a bigger scale. So it's figuring out how we do that within agencies and within policies and within funders. And so I think that will change Masconawa once we kind of go down the road and work it out and figure things out as we go.
And Tanis, how's the Y changing as part of their involvement with Planet Youth?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would agree with everything Megan and Karen have said. And I think there's a couple of pieces for us that I think are really interesting for us to be able to hopefully look back in 6 months, a year, 3 years, 5 years, and say, wow, Planet Youth was the catalyst for this. And relative to the Indigenous parallel, I think we've had so many tremendous opportunities through Planet Youth. There was youth consultations with Indigenous youth. There's been opportunities to engage with elders and ceremonies. And then each and every meeting, discussion, opportunity talks about the Indigenous parallel. And so obviously in our organization, we're on our own individual, collective truth and reconciliation journey. And this is just going to provide so many more opportunities to learn, to understand, and to demonstrate what it is that we're learning and understanding. And I think that's just fabulous. And I think the other piece for us is around our facilities and our infrastructure. And I think that there is no question we're very privileged to have the physical spaces that we have at the YMCA and to be able to serve community through those spaces. And I think this challenges us as an organization to really think about how our youth really, truly serve in those facilities, those that we already serve, and then those that we don't. Because if I were to be honest, for the ones that we serve now, a lot of it would be self-directed. We certainly have some staff that are amazing with youth and have that ability to empower the youth to really act on youth voice, build agency in youth. But we also have staff and volunteers who get scared if there's more than 3 youth together at any given moment, right? You just give into those stereotypes. And so this is an opportunity to break down some of those stereotypes and to think differently about how we use space, how youth can have voice into what happens in our space, how youth can have voice into significant volunteer opportunities, whether it's advisory groups, the board, things like that. So I think it's a real opportunity to demonstrate, not just talk about youth engagement across the entire organization. And that's, I really, really genuinely hope that's a way that we can look back and say, Planet Youth helped us get to where we really wanted to be.
So Tanis, I'm just going to skip ahead to our last question because I'm just being mindful of time and wanting to leave some time for questions. What is yours and what is YMCA Calgary's vision for Calgary? Should we be successful with Planet Youth? What is that going to look like? What is the ideal state for Calgary going to look like?
For YMCA Calgary, we would say a place where every youth belong, grows, thrives, and lead. That's our vision for every single person, staff, volunteer, anyone that has contact with the YMCA. I think to dig a little deeper, probably a place where every youth can live their authentic self, a place where they're respected and valued for who they are, the journey they're on, and the place they're at in that particular moment. And I think the final comment for me and for us as an organization is that place that Megan talked about where making relatives is the norm. And Western and Indigenous ways of knowing and being are simply understood, demonstrated, valued, and respected in ways that make the most sense at any given moment. That's what we hope Planet Youth will be.
That's awesome. Yeah. I like that tagline, belong, grow, thrive, and lead. It's really good.
But really, Jason, surprising. You really like that.
Yeah, totally. Karen, what is Trellis's thoughts on this?
Oh, yet again, ditto. That was really well put, Tanis. Yeah, I think having communities that are flourishing and have the skills and assets needed to interweave and take care of what they know they need. I think there's a lot of conversation about how we've over professionalized our communities. We've gotten to a point where if you have a flat tire, you call CAA, whereas 50 years ago, you might have just stopped and had someone help you on the side of the road. It's often that, if you have a friend who's going through something really tough, you might say, like, maybe grief process, oh, you should go and see a counselor, instead of like maybe just connecting. So how has our community shifted into over professionalization, and how do we get back to seeing ourselves as experts in our neighbors' lives or in our community? And yeah, as Megan had put it, that how are we building relations with the folks that we live next door to? A lot of us, I'm sure, in this space, myself included, I'm not that connected to people who are geographically living quite close to me, who I cross paths with every single day. And how do we build space and capacity for that? So again, us as professionals aren't needed as much, and people feel a sense of identity, belonging, connection within their natural communities to be able to have their needs met without the need for reliance on professional services. And then, yeah, sort of like, again, that 20 generations. working in the care system for some time, eliminating pieces like that, that people don't need to turn to drugs and alcohol because they experienced trauma as a child, that child intervention doesn't need to happen because families are able to meet each other's needs within communities instead of having a professional come in and remove a child or remove a family member. So that's sort of like when I talk about the nitty gritty under stepping back from professionalization, it's like the bigger systemic impacts of professional intervention and how we are 20 generations from now, 20 years from now, not seeing that anymore.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And Megan, what is yours and Mosconawa's vision for Calgary, with a successful Planet Youth?
Well, I think I'll speak on mine. I think Mosconawa it's been based on helping our families and our children, right? So whatever that looks like for our young people and our families that are voicing what their needs are, that we can continue to build those relationships and, help them in the best way we can. I guess it's hard for me to explain what my hope is. I guess I'll tell you try to shorten a little story. Is being a mentor and a leader and building those relationships with youth that help them see that they matter. And I can speak from a personal space, and that our families are not always our blood. And having people in my life that weren't my blood relatives, but relatives to me that helped me see who I was, who saw me, who gave me opportunity to get to where I am now. And so for me, the passion is very personal, because if I hadn't have had those relationships, I don't know where I would have ended up. And so for me, it is about that systemic piece as well, and being a voice for change, and really challenging things to be different. So yes, I consider myself a warrior. I'm a fighter. I do it for all the young people. And I think being in this work for so long and being able to have those relationships and opportunities provided to me and be seen as a human being rather than a problem child because of all of the other things going on for me when I was young, helped me see things differently. Right. So I think that's kind of my hope for Planet Youth, and everything that we do is to really see these kids and really provide what their needs are. And really, it's not about you or I. It's not about us and what we want. It's about what they want. And so fighting for that for them.
That's great. Thank you very much. And I think I'll just add in, from the United Way and from my perspective, I'm really looking, I think echoing what everyone is saying about building a strong foundation for our youth. And I like this theme that's kind of woven in, that really centering it around relationships. And when I've spoken about Planet Youth to my friends, so the people that are not professionals in the community development world, that's really what everybody says. That it's like, wow, it's like going to this place, maybe like Karen said, back in sort of like our past, where these sorts of things were just normal, where we looked out, where we were intentional about looking out for each other. I think, I'm not sure if some of the people on this call are connected to the natural supports initiatives that have popped up around the table, but that idea of building relationships with the people in your community, and doing it in an intentional way that is in service and supportive of the youth, right? That and just a couple of situations that I've had in my personal life where I've had the chance to see kids of my friends in the community and been able to help them out or make comments, and having their parents come back to me and say, it's great, it's nice to have friends because we're looking out for our children in the community, and that's important. I think about when we first moved to the community I live in, and my wife happened to be at home, and a young person was rollerblading by our house, and fell and broke her arm right in front of our house. And my wife was able to help them through that sort of situation. My wife's a nurse, so it was doubly helpful in that regard. But these kids were just at home by themselves and didn't necessarily, because their families didn't necessarily have supports in their life to be able to look after their kids. And so I just would like to see that sort of circle of caring be built around the young people that we have, and that we're intentional about it. Howie, that sort of wraps up our question, or like our formal sort of panel presentation. I think now we'd like to open it up to questions from everyone else.
Okay, I'll just turn off the focus mode. I think I turned it off, and then we should just go into the well, we should be able to go into just gallery view, everyone, and yeah. Oh, I turned off the focus mode. Does that work for everyone? So we can just open up to questions, and if anybody wants to raise their hand. Otherwise, I see Cor Top has joined us today, and I might just ask Cor, you've talked a lot about youth at our different meetings. Cor, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I think our panel would really like to know what your thoughts are as well. So do you mind, Cor? Oh, maybe he's not there.
So, hello.
Hello. I hope you don't mind
Can
me
you
putting
hear
you on
me?
the
Okay.
spot, Cor, to give you the spotlight for the first round of questions or first kick here, but
Thank you very much, Howie, for giving me the opportunity. I missed most of the conversation, but I think I will just I'll just make a point on youth. I think this is a wonderful initiative. Yes, as you said, my community youth has been struggling for years that I have been in Canada, more than 20 years now. And because of the cultural adaptation and the issues in the families with newcomers, which is general situation to many, that their families are struggling and their parents are struggling as well, then that struggle come to youth. And I think this is a good approach to look at how can we help or support youth to thrive? How do we support their parents to build a community? I think this is a wonderful initiative to move forward with as a model to use for those that are struggling, for those youth that are struggling, that have identity crisis, that have, do not have sense of belonging to anywhere they are at, whether it's school setting or home setting, because as I've been talking about how the youth or kids in the families, they live in Canada at school, but when they go home, they live in different country. Because at home, it's different culture, totally different culture. So how do we embrace that? So I think that's how, what I can add on to this, and it's a question to all. We have youth in Calgary or in any Canada, in Alberta, that that live in different countries within the community or at home. So yeah, thank you very much.
no, thanks, Cor. Anybody want to take a run at that, Jason, or any member of the want to address that?
I think I'd like to open it up to everyone. And I think my first reflection would be that this is one of the reasons why I think the Indigenous parallel is so important, because I think this question of identity is so critical. And how do we create space for people to be their authentic selves? And how do we support people in a way that's culturally relevant to them, and building in the structures to do that. I think when we first of all open up the question with our Indigenous relatives about this and work with them to build the model, I think it provides us with an exemplar about how we can do that with other communities. And I think sometimes the weakness within the not-for-profit sector has been in treating newcomers as a homogeneous group and saying, like, that, an approach that might work with one group of newcomers is going to work with all groups of newcomers, because people come to Calgary for all sorts of different stories, and it's not necessarily for the same reasons. And the life experiences of a young person whose parents are moving from, I don't know, Norway as oil and gas executives is going to be radically different for a person that's I think about a former colleague of mine who came on his own to Canada when he was 16 because of some safety concerns in his home community, and not that his home community was an unsafe country, but just sort of their identity didn't fit with the majority identity. And so their experience coming to Canada was a radically different experience. And we need to be mindful about that. And we need to be able to speak from a culturally relevant perspective. And I'll pass it on to anyone else from the team to be able to comment.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. I was actually just thinking about that too. And of course, I can only speak from my own lived experience. I can't speak for other people. But I think it's that accepting all of us for exactly who we are and what our values are. Growing up as a very fair individual, I've gotten many, many, many messages throughout my life about not being Indian enough, that people have an expectation of what Indigenous people should look like or act like or be like. But that was never my experience in community. That's not how it works. Blood quantum isn't a thing. It's a way of living and how you believe in the world and live your values, right? There's so many different contexts around that. And so not being able to hide when you go into a system and being able to be exactly who you are without judgment, right? And I think part of that is that acceptance that I think we need to anyway, is, just respect each other's values. Let people be who they are without assuming we know better than them. And that, again, with more and more learning about who I am as a human being, which is exactly, there's no such thing as Indigenous people. We're human beings. All of the Indigenous languages on how we describe ourselves are human beings. They never separated from anything else, right? So I think that's another context, and I think that goes for everybody. And yeah, so I really struggle with that. And I think most of the hiding needs to be done in systems, and cultures and communities and values need to be given their own autonomy to be who they are, including language. And that's kind of how I see that.
Karen or Tanis, any thoughts?
Yeah, I was just going to add, that was something that we were really mindful of during the hiring process, thinking about how do you pick one person to pull together a community. And we're really conscious of, coming up with interview questions to get at the root of someone's openness to being able to enter a community. Even if they live there and they represent the language and culture that is dominant within that community, it's impossible to represent the community in its entirety. And how do we know when we've collected enough voices? How do we know when we've collected enough perspective that we have a good picture of what's really going on? And I think it's going to take time, and it's going to be an ebb and flow. So I do appreciate the reminder of that, even, so to speak, of how do we keep that in our brains as we're moving through? What voices aren't at the table yet? Who isn't here? Who haven't we heard from? What are we missing? Because there's a lot of experiences to share, and even how are we inviting people in a way that, as you're kind of mentioning, when a youth shows up, if they show up with their parent, are they showing up as their home self? If they show up with their friends from school, they're showing up as their school self. How do we hear both of those stories from that one person? So just because that one person shared their story, we still might not have the whole picture. So, and we're not going to get it perfect. This is not a promise, but that's a helpful reminder for us as we embark on this of how do we try our best, for sure.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything to add. I just agree with everything that Jason, Megan, and Karen said. And that is part of the responsibility I think we carry is how do we truly empower and support so people can be themselves, and even when that might look differently for the same person, depending on the environment. That's just part of the process, I think. And yes, a very good reminder of what we need to keep front and center.
Okay, thank you. Gary, I'll move on to you in a second, but first I see that Bruce Walker is here, and Bruce, I hope it's okay to put you on the spot as well, but the Calgary Police Youth Foundation is, I believe, at the table. It was one of the 11 organizations with Planet Youth, and of course they're connected to the Calgary Police Service and Bruce is with the Calgary Calgary Police Youth Services section. So Bruce, I know the police service has been working with youth for many, many years. During my time on the commission, I remember Yard, Mass, all the neighborhood type programs, the safe communities. So it'd be interesting to see if you have any questions or just any comments or what the services view might be on this program as well. So
yeah, no, thanks.
I hope it's okay to put you on the spot, but I just did. So go ahead.
Yeah, no worries. Hello, everyone, and sorry, I apologize. I was late coming to the call, so I was able to hear probably the last 12 minutes of the conversation. But you know, some of the stuff that we always try and do, especially with the support of the foundation, is obviously to reach out to the youth and hear their story. And you know, one of the biggest things that we're trying to focus on now is with my involvement more so in the last 6 months with the Youth Link Interpretive Center, is really engaging you know, the youth, especially more focused on the outreach. That's something we typically haven't done a great job at in the last couple of years, and something that we've certainly focused on with a lot of the emerging issues. You know, if you look at the opioid crisis, drugs in general, the shootings, the violence, it's something that we're really focused on now with regards to, you know, trying to engage with the youth at a young age, but also the middle schools, about providing just education and communication just around that type of lifestyle and what's out there in the community. So like, I'm really excited. And again, I apologize, I only heard the last few minutes, but I'd certainly like to connect with the panel afterwards, just have some more frank and honest discussions about you know, what's happening, because I think this is fantastic. So
Okay, thanks, Bruce. Gary, go ahead.
Well, thanks, Howie, and the panel. Very interesting presentation. And Megan, our Rotary Club, I'm with the Rotary Club of Calgary Centennial. We've been working in the past with Kirby at Pathways, now Miscanawa. And so it's good to see that you folks are engaged in this. And I guess from my perspective, as a member of Rotary and also a member of the Shaughnessy Y, what sort of expectations do you have for us to help this move forward?
That's a great question.
I could say
Gary.
something. Sorry, I always have something to say, Gary. Thank you so much for asking. I was going to say, use your influence in those areas that maybe we don't, right? If you have connections to potential policy or city planners where we need to take a look at policy to change things for our community here in the city, like that's the things that I would ask for. Potentially depending on your relationship and your reach within, you know, that systems change / policy pieces, I think are super important. And that we can all do together, right? As we listen to the young people and our families.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. Gary, you mentioned you're a member of the Shaughnessy Y, so thank you for being a member. And I think from my perspective, we probably are still working through what the role of Shaughnessy YMCA will be. Shaughnessy is a pilot community, so we obviously have hired a staff and will be activating a community action team there. And we'll certainly be looking for champions, right, who can maybe amplify the message. Hopefully, we will leverage the physical assets that we have, and we'll see even more youth in the building, hopefully taking on more volunteer roles, employment roles, participation in various programs, activities, and having them have opportunities for true engagement. So hopefully, you'll welcome youth that you see in the building, maybe youth that you haven't seen in the building before, and those will be some of the things that we'll be looking to do.
I think from my perspective too, I think it's also like, probably to echo what Megan said earlier, is about when I've been reflecting on Planet Youth, what we need right now is those leaders in the community that will step up to care about the community. And I know, and I think that aligns so nicely with what Rotary is today and how it's been over the past 100+ years in Calgary and around the world, really, is just this this need for people to step up and take leadership roles in their communities, whatever that sort of looks like, in terms of as basic as investing in the lives of the youth that surround you. If you know youth, investing in their time, mentoring them, those sorts of activities to, are there ways that you can advocate for youth in your circles of influence, and the needs of youth? There are a lot of pressures on youth these days, and it's not just that youth are struggling, definitely, but there is a lot of pressure on youth. And what I think that we can all do is to be advocates for the youth in our lives and the youth in our communities, and to listen to them, understand them, and speak on their behalf where we can, where we've got the influence to.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. Amplifying voices and finding ways, and maybe as individuals taking time to reflect on where are the opportunities to jump into your community in a different way and think about community in a different way. And if you hear, this is meant to be a really long project, so as you continue to hear Planet Youth buzzing up, or maybe different pieces around the local action committees, either joining yourselves or passing the message along to other folks that you think might be invested or might have good contributions.
So Gary, just maybe to amplify what we've talked about volunteerism and fundraising, and we Rotarians talk about a number of different things, and volunteering and fundraising usually come top of mind. And we're not even sure if we're good volunteers right now. But what I'm hearing from the four voices almost unanimously is they really need to hear a voice from Rotary, of talking to our friends, our relatives, just raising the whole profile of the great work that these four organizations and the other 7 around the table are doing, whether it's speaking to politicians or other business people in our community or other community members. Am I hearing that correctly from the 4 panelists, that more than money and more than volunteer hours, you really need us to really step up and be a strong voice, and that organizations like the United Way and the YMCA and Trellis and Misconawa already have great fundraising machines? Everybody can always use more money. I'm not saying that we don't need, and everybody can always use more volunteers, but the gap is really having strong community voices raising the message in a cogent or thoughtful way within the community. I see some heads nodding. Is that right?
Yeah, I would agree. I think someone once said, really high level prevention isn't sexy. It's hard to sell. Invest now and you'll see results 20 years from now. That example that I gave about hearing a pin drop at that session in Mexico, from a politician standpoint, they're looking for votes tomorrow, not 20 years from now. So it is difficult to have people understand or get behind or be excited about really long systemic change that is difficult to see tangible results. But that's where, that slide that Jason showed about the 20-year trajectory of the Icelandic model playing out speaks volumes to me of like, this really does work. You can send a person to treatment now and maybe solve one addiction at a time. But if we shift our community and stop people from entering into addiction in the first place, like that's the real money maker. But it's not. So
It's kind of like creating a
anyone who
system
can
to
get jazzed.
eradicate polio. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I would add too that there's a real piece here. I've been on the working committee for a year and a half, probably since the United Way brought back a group of people to really dig into Planet Youth. And when I think about the time we invested, it was about making relatives with each other and really understanding the work and really understanding a common vision and understanding of what we were truly signing on to, I think. And so we worked really hard at understanding the model. And part of that model and the strength of that model is hearing from the youth. And that's where the survey piece, the other ways that we can hear from the youth and put youth at the center. We've just now gotten to the point of identifying all 4 pilot sites, and it's a 5-year pilot. And I know when I've talked about that internally at the Y, people are like, 5 years for a pilot? That's kind of weird. But when you talk about what the long-term game is, it totally makes sense that 5 years as a pilot with these 4 sites that have been identified. And so I really hope that as we really settle in and launch these staff and these community action teams and hear from the youth, it'll be clear, Gary, to be able to go back to you, come back to Rotary and say, yes, we've talked about some things now, but now we have real clarity on what we really can utilize your assets, your voice, your connections, your networks, your affinity for positive youth development. And here's some tangible ways we can really make an ask. And yes, sure, we can always use funds and we can always use volunteers, but at the same time, we kind of know that part of it. What we're embarking on now is trying to really demonstrate a new way of working. And we've done, for the last year and a half, we tried to prepare ourselves for going forward and doing that work.
So just to ask Jason if
Gary, I think, can we just hear from Dan first? Sorry, we're going to run out of time here, and Dan had his hand up here. So,
thank you very much, Howie, and thank you, the panel, for your discussion. Just to give you a bit of background on myself, is that my first volunteer work was with Boys and Girls Club over 40 years ago as a counselor and doing a lot of things. I'm past chair of Hull Child and Family Services and a number of other organizations that have been engaged in, and I have strong relationships with Sutena and Megan. My grandchildren are Dene. Their other grandfather is a residential school survivor. So I come from a kind of a unique perspective on how I look at this. And one of the strongest community advocates for youth in our community is Mr. Core Top. And I think part of our job in Rotary is to provide the connectivity to organizations and to be almost a moral compass or a reminder that we cannot exclude other groups. Core ran a program that I was fortunate to be part of with South Sudanese Calgary, SSYYC. And we met with a number of their youth at the University of Calgary. We heard their voices. We heard very strongly their voices that they want to belong. This is their home, but they don't belong. They don't belong in their own homes because of the socioeconomic and the cultural issues that are in their own homes. They don't belong in our world because we, and I'll generalize, but we are afraid of their community because we don't understand. They, on a shoestring and with incredible community volunteer engagement, COMCAN, which CORE is the leader of, of that South Sudanese community have developed some incredible youth programs to get them engaged in sport, engaged in arts, engaged in educational and types of programs. The problem is that it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable the way they're building it, and they need that connectivity, and they need that support of groups of, like what we're talking about, Planet Youth. And they need the support of the Y. I mean, there is support, and then their access to some of the facilities is restricted because of who they are. So there's a whole bunch of things that need to happen. And if anything happens from this meeting, Jason and Megan and Tass, you and Karen, you need to meet with Mr. Core Top, and you need to meet with that community and have them as an active partner in what you're doing. I mean, that community is 16,000 refugees in Calgary community. 16,000. A lot of them are youth. And we read about all the bad things. We don't read about all the amazing things that they're doing in their community. So as Rotarians, our job is not only to advocate, but our job is to make sure there's a connectivity and to make sure that things can happen. That goes for you too, Bruce. I know you and I have had this discussion before. So anyway, that's my little rant for the night. So thank you.
Well, thanks, Dan. So I think we're coming pretty close to the close. I would just ask our panel, I've had a few questions. Am I okay to share your emails with the other members? I sense there's a number of Rotary clubs that would like to have all of you at different times attend as guest speakers and really learn more about. So if you're okay to share with their clubs, then I recognize there's no commitment, but I will share it with the people on the call today, if that's okay.
Yeah, no problem at all.
For Rotarians, for the other panelists, and I've said this at the last few meetings, is that youth is a passion of Rotary. We have the Rotary RILA, we have RIPEN, we do programs around the world. A lot of our World Service projects are geared towards getting basics to children, like clean water and washrooms and latrines, just so they can go to school on a regular basis, and looking after young girls so they can attend school at a regular basis. So youth empowerment and what Planet Youth is talking about is part of what Rotary does, similar with our Rotary polio eradication program. That was something we're still working at it, and we started it probably 30 or 40 years ago, was that, Dan? So I think that we would like to probably continue to explore ways, and if there's ways that you think Rotary can support you, please reach out to any of us and we'll try to get you in touch with the right person. If you think there's ways that you would like to help us support our youth programs, we probably need to find the balance between care and professionalization, which we lack on some of these programs, and being able to bring some of our youth programs into the 21st century as it is. So it's a so with that, we're at 5:27. Any quick last questions or comments before we go? Thank you so much for attending today. I hope everyone enjoyed it. I certainly did. It was a real eye-opener for me. So thank you, Jason. Thank you, Karen, Tanis, and Megan for sharing today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much. And a real honor to be able to meet with everyone today. And just to echo Howie's point, please don't hesitate to reach out to me at any time. I'd love to speak more about Planet Youth, and yeah, I'd love to be connected with all of you.
Okay, thank you. Have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.